The morning she was to be handed off, the drawing-room at Wexcombe smelled of beeswax and cold ash, and her cousin Diana stood at the window, arranging the truth about her the way she arranged flowers, for the effect it made on whoever came in. "She is no one," Diana said, and the Duke of Aldermere, who had come about the horses, turned from the mantel and looked at the plain young woman by the door, as though the word had failed to reach her. "A dependent. My father took her in when the Marsh side of the family disgraced itself. She keeps the still room, and she is grateful to us. Aren't you, Grace?" Grace Marsh did not answer that she was grateful, because she was not, and she had long ago stopped saying things she did not mean to people who would not have listened anyway. She stood with her chapped hands folded in a grey wool gown that had been turned twice, and she waited for the gentleman to nod and forget her, and go on to whatever he had come for. That was the shape her mornings took. The world looked at her and looked away, and she had made a kind of home inside the looking away, where nobody expected anything of her but the work, and the work she could do. But the Duke did not look away. He was a big man, dark, badly shaved, dressed like a farmer who had wandered into the wrong house, and he had a stillness about him that made Diana's brightness seem to rattle. He looked at Grace for what became an uncomfortable length of time, and then he said, in a low voice that had gravel in it, "What is her name?" "Grace," said Diana. "Grace Marsh," I said. "It hardly—" "I asked her," the Duke said. The room went very quiet. Diana's smile stayed where it was, fixed like a thing left out in frost. Grace lifted her eyes to the Duke's face, which was not a handsome face, being too heavy in the jaw and marked between the brows by whatever a man carries who has not slept easily in years. And she found there no cruelty, and no charity either, only a plain and patient attention, as if he had all morning and meant to spend it on her answer. "Grace Marsh, Your Grace," she said. "There," said Diana, with a little laugh. "Now the Greys. My father said you were interested in the Greys, and I'm sure Grace has 100 things to be getting on with." "I came about a horse, and I find the horse is not the thing worth having in this house," the Duke said, still looking at Grace. And then, as though he had said more than he meant, he turned to Diana and became briefly, roughly civil about carriage teams and grass, and Grace took her chance and left the room. But she carried the moment out with her, the way you carry the print of a bright window on the eye after you have looked away from it. And it would not fade for the rest of that grey morning. And this is the story of how a man who could not say a kind thing came to say the truest one he had, out loud, in a room full of people who had spent years agreeing that she was no one. To understand how Grace Marsh came to be handed round the county like a length of serviceable cloth, you have to go back 4 years, to the winter the Marsh house came down. Her father had been a physician in the town of Nether Stowey, a clever, warm, disorganized man who compounded his own medicines and kept his own accounts badly, and died owing more than anyone had guessed. And when the debts were called, the house and the shop and the dispensary went with them. Grace was 19. She had grown up at his elbow in the still room behind the shop, grinding and weighing and steeping, learning the difference between a tincture and a decoction before she learned to dance. And when it was all gone, the only things she owned in the world with a knowledge in her hands, and a small mahogany chest of her father's, in which she kept his good balance, and a set of brass weights, and 40 little labelled drawers of what had not been sold. The Wexcombe Marshes took her in because it looked well to take her in, and because a girl who knew the still room was cheaper than a housekeeper. For 4 years she had made their salves and their cordials, their rose water and their fever draughts, and the lavender water Diana wore, and she had asked for nothing, and been given nothing, and had grown, she thought, past wanting. She was 23 now. She had a plain face and a steady hand, and a way of becoming invisible in a room that had started as protection, and had set, over 4 years, into something like her nature. So when her uncle told her, a week after the Duke's visit, that it had been arranged, she received it standing, with her hands folded, in the same grey gown. "Aldemir wants a still-room woman," her uncle said, not looking up from his letters. "His own died at Christmas, and the house has gone to seed, they tell me. It is a great estate, Grace, and a great opportunity, and you will go on Thursday. The wages come to me, of course, until your keep here is squared. I have been more than fair about your keep." "Yes, uncle," said Grace, who had done the sum of her keep many times and knew exactly how fair he had been. "He asked for you by name," her uncle said, and something in the way he said it, sidelong, made Grace understand that this was thought to be strange, and that it was being turned over in the house and found to mean something not quite respectable. "By name? I cannot think how he had it." "He asked me for it," said Grace, "in the drawing-room, in front of Diana." And she went to pack her father's chest, and she did not let her uncle see that her heart was going hard against her ribs, because a great house 40 miles off, where nobody had yet learned to look away from her, was the nearest thing to hope she had felt in 4 years, and hope, in her experience, was a thing best kept in a closed drawer. Ashcombe Court, when the carrier's cart brought her to it on the Thursday, was the largest house she had ever stood in front of, and the saddest. It was high summer, the limes along the drive in heavy leaf, and the verges gone to seed and foxglove, and the house sat in all that greenery, like a man in a good coat who has stopped shaving. Half the shutters were closed. Grass stood in the gravel. A great stone urn by the door had cracked with an old frost and never been mended, and someone had set a milk pail under the drip of a broken gutter, and then forgotten it, so that it stood there full of green water with the swifts stitching the air above it. A thin, harassed woman met her at a side door, and turned out to be the housekeeper, a Mrs. Penhallow, who had the look of someone bailing a boat she has privately given up on. "You're the still-room girl," she said. "Thank God. Can you make a black draught that works?" The last one couldn't, and half the maids have gone, and His Grace won't have new ones because he won't have strangers in the house. So there's 4 of us doing for 20, and the linen press has got the damp. She said all this in one breath, walking fast down a stone passage, and then she stopped and looked at Grace properly, and her face changed. "You're young. I thought they'd send someone old." "I was taught young," said Grace. "Well," said Mrs. Penhallow, and left it there, but she had heard something in the girl's plainness that reassured her, and she was kinder after it. The still room at Ashcombe was a north-facing stone chamber off the kitchen court, and it had been a good one once, and was now a wreck. The shelves were furred with dust. Someone had let the fire out under the little still, and never relit it. There were jars gone to sugar, and jars gone to mould, and a great stone mortar with a cracked pestle, and the whole place smelled of damp and old fat and neglect. Grace set her father's chest on the scoured table in the middle of the room, and she stood in the doorway a moment and looked at the ruin of it, and for the first time in 4 years she felt something like gladness, because a ruin is not a dead thing. A ruin is only a thing that has been waiting. She took off her good gown and put on her working one and began. She would not, she had decided on the cart, ask permission for anything that did not require it, because a woman who asks permission for every small thing teaches a house to say no to her. She scrubbed the shelves with sand and lye. She threw out what was spoiled, keeping the jars, because good glass is dear, and she could see there was no money here for glass. She got the fire going under the still, and ran clean water through it twice to sweeten it. And on the second day, going through what the last woman had left, she found the household physic book, a fat vellum-bound thing 2 generations deep in different hands, and she sat down on an upturned pail in the last of the light, and read it the way another woman might read a novel, and she began, as she read, to keep her own book. This is the part the county never understood about Grace Marsh, because the county thought a still room was where you made nice-smelling water. What she kept from that first week was a record. She wrote the date and the weather. She wrote what she made, and from what, and the weight of every part, and where the material had come from, and what it had cost. When she gave a draft to a sick maid, she wrote the maid's name and the hour, and what ailed her, and what she gave, and a day later, whether it had answered. She wrote in a small, plain hand, with the numbers in a column that squared, because her father, for all he could not keep a shop, had taught her that a medicine you cannot repeat is not a medicine, but a piece of luck, and luck kills people. A physic book that gave the quantities but not the dates was, he used to say, a recipe for a corpse, and no warning of which one. So Grace kept the dates. She kept the hours. She weighed everything on her father's brass balance, to the grain, and she wrote the grains down. And within a fortnight there was one room in that whole sinking house where everything was known and squared and could be proved. Nobody told her the household accounts were part of the still room's business, but they always had been in a well-run house, because the still room bought its own sugar and spirit and spice and answered for them. So when Mrs. Penhallow, near weeping over the quarter's books one wet evening, said the grocer's bill had come to near double what it should, and she could not see where, Grace asked to look, and took it away, and sat up with it and her own new-started book, and by candle-end she had it. "It is the loaf-sugar," she told Mrs. Penhallow the next morning, laying the grocer's account beside a column of her own. "Look, he charges you for best double refined at 10p, and what came into this house is common brown at 4p 3 farthings, because I have tasted it, and I have weighed a loaf, and it runs damp and short. That is one thing. The other is that the weights are wrong. He sends 100 weight and bills 100 weight, but the cheese that came Tuesday I put on my own scale, because I weigh everything, and it wanted 11 pounds of its mark. Do that across a quarter, and there is your doubling. It is not that you are careless, Mrs. Penhallow. It is that nobody in this house has weighed anything in a 12-month, and a tradesman is only as honest as the scale he is watched on. Mrs. Penhallow stared at the 2 columns as if they were witchcraft, and then she laughed, a short, surprised bark of a laugh that seemed to hurt her, as if she had not used it in a while. 12 years I've fought that man, she said. 12 years. Then we shall want a good scale kept by the door, said Grace, and every sack weighed as it comes, in front of whoever brings it. He will hate it. He will find another house to cheat inside a month, and you will save enough by Michaelmas to mend that gutter. It was Mrs. Penhallow who first came round to her, and it happened over that scale, and it was the first of the ways the house of Ashcombe turned, one person at a time, toward the plain young woman who had come to keep its still room, and had begun, without asking anyone, to weigh the world. The Duke she did not see for above a week, though she felt him in the house the way you feel weather coming. He kept to the east wing, and the home farm and the stables, and the maids spoke of him in lowered voices, not with fear exactly, but with a wary care, the way you speak of a dog that has been beaten and might bite or might not. He would not have strangers. He did not dine in company. He had turned away, that spring, an invitation from the assembly at Taunton and a cousin who wished to visit, and he rode out early and came back late and muddy, and something was wrong at the heart of the house that nobody would name to the new still-room girl. Their first meeting alone was about a burn. He came into the kitchen court at dusk, with his left hand wrapped in a neckcloth soaked black, having taken hold of a lamp bracket in the harness room that a groom had left hot, and the boy who should have dressed it had gone with the others, and Mrs. Penhallow was 3 miles off at her sister's. So it was Grace who was fetched, and Grace who unwound the ruined neckcloth in the light of the still-room fire, and looked at the palm beneath, which was blistered white across, and would, she saw, be worse by morning if it were left to the old fashion of butter and a bandage. This wants cool water first, she said, not grease. Grease holds the heat in. Sit. The Duke of Aldermere sat on her upturned pail, and let a still-room servant take his scalded hand into her lap and lower it into a basin of cool water she had drawn from the yard pump. And he watched her face while she did it, and did not speak. Grace worked. She changed the water 3 times as it warmed against his skin. Then she took from her father's chest a jar of a pale ointment and spread it cool on a strip of clean linen, and bound the hand loosely, not tight, talking as she went, not to soothe him, but because she talked to everyone she physicked, it being her father's way. This is a salve of my own keeping, she said. Lard washed 9 times in rose water till it has no smell of the pig left in it, and then wintergreen and a little beeswax and the juice of houseleek, which is the fat green thing that grows on old roofs and is worth more than it looks. It draws the fire out. I will dress it morning and night, and you are not to pick at it. And in 3 days the blister will be down, and in a week you will have your hand. She tied the last of the linen. There is no butter in this house that I have made, your grace. Butter on a burn is how you keep a scar. You talk a great deal, said the Duke, but not unkindly, looking at his bound hand as though it belonged to someone else. I was taught that a frightened patient that is being talked to is not thinking about his hand, said Grace. You are not frightened, so it is only habit. I can stop. No, he said, and then, after a silence in which the fire settled and the Swifts had gone quiet outside, what is in the chest? So she told him. She opened the 40 little drawers and named what was in them, and told him which had come from her father's shop, and could not be got again. Now the shop was gone, and he stood and looked into the drawers with his bandaged hand held against his chest, and asked her 3 questions, each of which was a better question than the last. And Grace understood that this rough, silent man was quicker than he let the world see, and that he had been, at some time, in the habit of learning things, and had stopped. My last still-room woman, he said, kept none of this. She kept a locked cupboard and a bad temper. Then you were being poisoned slowly by kindness, said Grace, which is the commonest way. And the Duke of Aldermere laughed, once, a rusty broken sound that seemed to surprise him more than it surprised her, and he took his bound hand away into the dark of the house, and that was the first time. The wound in that house had a name, and Grace learned it not from him, but from the matriarch. And the matriarch of Ashcombe was not an aunt, and did not sit in a chair, dispensing wit. She was the old dairy woman, Bet Cordwainer, who had come to the estate as a girl of 12 to scald pans, and had stayed 60 years, and buried a husband and 2 of the family she served, and who now, half blind with cataract and slow on her feet, kept the dairy going by feel and by the noses of the girls under her, and called the Duke by his Christian name of Robert, because she had held him as a baby, and would not be told otherwise. Grace fell in with her over the setting of milk, because the dairy and the still-room are old neighbours, and Bet, discovering that the new girl knew that cream will not rise in a dirty pan, nor butter come in a thundery air, took to her, and talked, as blind people talk, in a steady, low stream, while her hands did the knowing. You'll not have had it out of him why the house is shut, Bet said one afternoon, skimming by touch, her clouded eyes on nothing. Nor will you. He's not said a true word about it in 3 years, that boy. It was his brother. I did not know he had a brother, said Grace. Nobody does now. Edmund, the elder, handsome as sin, and twice as dear to their mother, God rest her. And it was Edmund had this place, and ran it into the ground with cards and company. And it was Robert paid and paid and paid, being the steady one, the plain one, the one nobody wrote poems to. Her hands moved. The dairy was cool and smelled of clean milk and stone. 3 years back, there was a quarrel, a hard one, over money in the hall, with the doors open and the servants hearing. Robert said a thing to his brother. I'll not say what, for I had it third hand, and a thing like that grows in the carrying. But it was cruel, and it was true, which is the worst kind. And Edmund took his horse that same night and went, and has not come back, and has not written, and lives, they say, at Bristol on what he can borrow, 40 mile off, and might as well be the moon. Grace was quiet. Outside a dog barked and was still. He is not dead then, she said. That's the whole of it, said Bet. If the man were dead, our Robert could mourn him and be done. But he's alive and estranged, and every day he stops away is a day Robert said the thing again in his own head. So he shut the house his brother loved and let it go to ruin, because to mend it would be to enjoy what he took. Or that's how he has it reasoned. He's punishing himself with a leaking roof, the great fool, and he'll do it till he dies, unless somebody... She stopped, her blind face turned toward Grace with an uncanny accuracy. You've a sensible sound to you, girl. Don't you go being sensible about that man. Sense won't reach him. He's had sense from me for 3 years, and look at the gutters. Grace said nothing to that, and changed the subject to the churn, but she carried Bet's words up to the still room, and set them beside what she had seen, and understood the house better than she wished to. Because a man punishing himself for a cruelty he cannot take back is not a puzzle to a woman who has spent 4 years being told she is no one. She knew that kind of quiet. She had lived inside it. That week she found the first of the gifts, though she did not know to call it that. She had said to no one but the empty still room, wrestling the great stone mortar, that the cracked pestle would take her thumb off one day. And on the Friday, there was a new pestle standing in the mortar, lignum vitae, close-grained and heavy and exactly the right length, the sort a man buys from a turner and does not explain. She asked Mrs. Penhallow, who knew nothing. She asked the one kitchen boy, who knew nothing. Nobody had brought it, and nobody would own it. And Grace stood with the good weight of it in her hand, and felt her face grow warm in the cold room, and put the thought away in its drawer, because a duke does not buy a pestle for a still-room girl, and to think he did was the kind of hoping that gets a woman laughed at. Their second meeting alone began as business, and did not stay there. He came to the still room on the pretext of his hand, which was healing clean as she had promised, and stood turning the bright new skin to the light, and then did not go. He looked at her book, open on the table, and turned it round with one finger to read her small squared hand. You write down the hour, he said, and the weather. A medicine is a fact, or it is nothing, said Grace. If I cannot say what I did, and when, and to whom, and whether it answered, then I did not physica anyone. I only guessed at them, and was lucky or was not. My father used to say that a physic book without dates is a recipe for a corpse, and no notice served of which one. She took the book back, gently, and squared it to the table's edge. So I keep the dates. My steward keeps no dates, said the Duke, and there was a new note under the words, dry and considering. My steward, Mr. Vane, keeps figures that are always very round and always come out even, and I have not looked hard at them in 3 years, because to look at this estate at all was more than I could do. Grace said nothing. It was not her place to speak of the steward, and they both knew it, and she felt the shape of a thing move under the surface of the room, unspoken. The gutter is mended, she said instead, to move him off it. Over the east door, since Tuesday. Is it? Said the Duke, who had mended it himself at first light before the yard was up, having heard her tell Mrs. Penhallow that the milk pail full of green water was a disgrace to a Christian house, and he looked at her plain, steady face and could not tell whether she knew. And Grace looked back at him, and did not let him see that she had watched him from the still-room window, with a rag and a soldering iron, and a heart in her throat at 6 in the morning. They stood either side of the scoured table, with the truth between them, like a third person in the room. And neither reached for it, and after a moment he wished her good day in his gravel voice, and went, and Grace sat down slowly on her pail, and pressed her cold hands together, and told herself, in her father's dry, sensible voice, not to be a fool. The ease of it, when it came, took them both unarmed, and it came over a pig. There was a pig at Ashcombe, an old sow called the Duchess by the whole household, in a joke so ancient nobody remembered making it. And the Duchess fell sick of a green apple glut in the last week of July, and lay in her sty groaning like a felled bishop, and the pig being beloved, Grace was sent for. She came out into the gold evening light with her sleeves rolled, and found the Duke of Aldermere already there in his shirt, leaning on the sty rail, and regarding his stricken pig with an expression of profound gloom, and something in the sight of him, the great powerful man, the ruined coat, the beloved ridiculous pig, undid her usual gravity, and she laughed before she could stop it. "She has eaten the windfalls," said Grace. "All of them, by the look. She's not dying. She's merely very sorry for herself, which in a pig looks the same." "She looks," said the Duke, "as I feel most mornings." "Then I shall physic you both the same," said Grace, "with warm bran and a bitter draught, and no sympathy whatever." And she climbed the rail, and got down in the straw beside the groaning sow, without a thought for her gown. And the Duke, after a startled moment, climbed in after her, and for the better part of an hour the two of them sat in the straw of a pig sty, in the last of the light, dosing a fat sow with a horn spoon, and it was the freest hour Grace had spent since her father died. They talked of nothing. He held the Duchess's head, which was like holding a warm sack of potatoes that resented you, and Grace ladled the bran, and the pig blew bran back over the Duke's shirt in a fine mist, and Grace told him he wore it well, and he said gravely that he had always thought bran becoming. And she told him about the physician's pony of her childhood that had learned to open the dispensary door and eat the licorice, and he told her, haltingly at first, and then less so, about a dog he had had as a boy that would not be parted from him, and swam a mill pond in flood to reach him, and was thrashed for it, and did it again the next day. And they laughed, and the light went gold, and then rose over the far hills, and the swifts came down low over the yard, and neither of them said a single true or serious or aching thing, and it was the truest hour either of them had passed in years. "You have straw in your hair," he said at the end of it, when the sow had heaved to her feet and pronounced herself cured by the simple act of trying to eat Grace's apron. "I have straw everywhere," said Grace. "I shall be finding it Tuesday." She climbed the rail and dropped down on the clean side, and looked back at him over it, at the Duke of Aldermere standing in a pig-sty, in a bran-flecked shirt, with the rose-light on his heavy face. And she thought, with the sudden clean pain of a thing seen too late to unsee it, that she had never in her life liked the look of anyone half so well, and she wished him a very steady good evening, and took herself and her horn-spoon indoors before her face could tell him so. "You are somewhere warm, I hope, wherever you are hearing this, with the door shut against the dark, and nothing wanting doing till morning." Stay a while. The best of it is still to come, and the pig, you will be glad to know, made a full recovery. August came in, hot and still, and the second person to come round to Grace was the one she would least have chosen. And it happened over a child's fever, though the child was never in danger, being watched the whole while by 3 grown women who loved her. The undergardener's small daughter, a mite of 5 called Suki, took a summer fever, the low kind that frightens a mother more than it harms the child, and the gardener's wife, half distracted, came to the kitchen door at night, because there was nowhere else in that shut-up county to go. The nearest apothecary was 7 miles, and would want paying. So it was Grace who went down to the cottage by the walled garden with her chest, and Grace who saw at a glance that the child was hot but not gravely so, the fever high but the breathing easy, and the neck soft, and who spent the night not because the child needed saving, but because the mother needed a person in the room who was not afraid. She sponged the child with vinegar and water. She gave a little cooling draught in small doses by the hour, and wrote each dose in her book by the light of a rushlight, the hour and the drops, and the child's warmth judged by her lip against the small forehead. And toward 3 the fever broke, and the child slept, and the mother wept with relief in the corner. And it was then that the hard woman came in. Mrs. Cordwainer's granddaughter, a sharp-faced upper housemaid named Alice Trewin, had no love for the still-room girl who had come from nowhere and been noticed, and she had said so in the servants' hall more than once. But Suki was her sister's child. She had come down through the dark expecting to find the child worse and the stranger out of her depth, and she found instead the child sleeping easy, and her sister comforted, and the plain girl from Wexcombe sitting quiet by the bed with the little book, writing down the hour the fever turned. "You stayed," Alice said. It came out harder than she meant, being made of surprise. "There was no reason to go," said Grace. "Till she turned? She has turned. She will be hungry and cross by noon, and want spoiling. And you are to let her be spoiled. It is good for a fever after." She closed her book. "You are the aunt. She said your name in the hot part. Alice." She wanted her aunt Alice. Something happened in the sharp face then, a working, quickly mastered. "They said in the hall you were a cold thing," Alice said low. "That you weighed the cheese and wrote down what everyone ate and were a duke's spy or worse. I said it too." "I do weigh the cheese," said Grace, standing and gathering her chest, too tired to be anything but plain. "And I write down what I give a sick child, so that the next time a child is sick, I will know what answered, and not have to guess over her in the dark. You may call that cold, if you like. I have found it warmer than guessing." She looked at the sleeping child, and her tiredness let something show that she mostly kept shut. "I had a father who guessed at the end, because he would not keep his book straight. And I have thought since that, if he had kept it, he might have caught his own trouble in time to physic it. So I keep mine. Good night, Alice. She'll do." She went up through the grey beginning of the light, and behind her Alice Trewin stood a long time by her niece's bed, and by morning the story in the servants' hall had begun, very slowly, to change. And that was the second turning, and it was the more solid for having been made against the grain. Mr. Vane the steward began, that same week, to take notice of the still-room girl, and it was not a kind notice. He was a smooth, well-fed, well-spoken man of 50, in good black cloth, who had run Ashcombe's business for 11 years, and run it, latterly, for himself, in the long shadow of a master who would not look at the books. He had heard about the scale at the kitchen door. He had heard that the grocer had suddenly grown honest, and then given up the account, and that Mrs. Penhallow was talking of savings, and that the new girl kept figures, and a man who has spent 11 years relying on nobody keeping figures does not like to hear that someone has begun. He came to the still room on a hot afternoon, on a pretext of spirits of wine for the lamps, and he was pleasant, and he was frightening in the way that only a pleasant man protecting an income can be. "You keep a very particular book, I hear," he said, glancing at it where it lay. "Weights and dates. Very particular. It is a rare thing in a young woman, such particularity. One wonders where it will stop." He smiled. "A great house is a delicate machine, Miss Marsh. It has run a long time in its own way. A newcomer, however clever, however well-meaning, can do a great deal of harm poking at works she does not understand, and find herself, when the harm is done, without a character and without a place, and far from her friends. If she has friends," he let that sit. "I should hate to see it. I take an interest in the staff. I should be glad to look over your little book myself some evening, and set you right on the house's ways, before you weigh something you oughtn't." Grace had folded her hands. She had been spoken to like this before, by her uncle, in the same reasonable voice, and she had learned that it wanted feeding with fear, and starved without it. "You are kind to take an interest, Mr. Vane," she said evenly. "My book is the still-room's own, and squares to the still-room's own stores, which are small, and I keep it because a medicine without a date is a danger. You are welcome to see the physic in it any hour you like. There is nothing in it but weights and the sick." She met his eye. "If the house's larger works are sound, my little book cannot trouble them. A true figure never yet quarrelled with another true figure. It is only the false ones that fight." It was said without heat, and it was unanswerable, and Mr. Vane understood in that moment that he had a difficulty on his hands, that flattery would not move, and threat had not moved, and his smile stayed on his face a half-second too long, the way Diana's had, and Grace saw the fear come up behind it, and knew him then for exactly what he was. The third meeting alone came after that, and it strayed the furthest yet, and it was the day she found the second gift. He had taken to coming to the still room in the evening. There was no pretext left by now, and they had both stopped making one, and it had become the hour of both their days, though neither would have dared to say so. He would sit on the second pail he had, without a word, caused to appear, and Grace would work, and they would talk, and this evening she came in from the dairy to find that the shelf where she kept her father's chest had been taken down and rebuilt 6 inches lower, and a good oil lamp set beside it on a bracket, so that the chest now stood exactly at the height of her own hand, and the light fell over her left shoulder as she worked, which is where a right-handed woman wants it, and no man knows that who has not watched a woman work. She stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long moment, and then she did not say anything about it at all, because to say anything was to break it. And when the Duke came in and sat on his pail, she gave him good evening in her ordinary voice, and reached her father's chest down at its new perfect height, and something passed between them in her not mentioning that was larger than thanks. They talked that evening of his brother, though he did not know he was going to. It came sideways, out of a jar. She was decanting a cordial and said, half to herself, that it was her father's own receipt, and that she had quarrelled with him over it once, badly, the last winter of his life, calling him careless to his face, because he would not write his doses down, and that she would give a great deal now to have that quarrel back and not have it. You said a true thing to him, the Duke said, low, and it was cruel, and now he is gone where you cannot take it back. Yes, said Grace, and looked up, because that was too exact to be about her father. I had a brother, said the Duke of Aldermere to the fire, in the gravel voice with all the gravel gone soft. Have a brother. Edmund? I said a thing to him 3 years ago in the hall of this house, a true thing, the truest and worst thing I knew, because he had bled this place white, and I was tired, and I wanted to wound him, and I knew exactly where the soft place was, and I put my thumb in it. And he went. And every day he stays away. I have said it to him again, here. He touched his own breast, once. And I have let his house rot around me, because I could not see how a man who would say such a thing deserved a whole roof over his head. He stopped. He had not meant to say the half of it. Bet told you the fact of it. I am telling you the weight. You could write to him, said Grace very gently, not moving. And say what? That the roof leaks, said Grace, and that you cannot mend it without him, because it was always more his than yours, and you find you do not want it whole while he is at Bristol in a hired room. You need not say you are sorry. Men like you and my father cannot say it, and it is not believed when you do. You need only say the roof leaks. He will understand you. Brothers do. And the Duke looked at her across the lamplit chest at the perfect height of her hand, and did not write to his brother that night. But the letter had been started in him, and both of them knew it, and it was the nearest either had come to saying the other thing, the thing under all of it, and neither said that either. The evening she understood it could not be had came at the turn of the month, with a change in the weather. A dry storm went over Ashcombe, the kind that thunders and will not rain, and the air was thick and green, and the house restless with it. And Grace could not settle in the still room, and went up at dusk to the long gallery that ran the top of the shut wing, where she had no business being, because she wanted air and height, and to be for an hour in a grand place, the way you press a bruise. The gallery was all in Holland covers, the pictures shrouded, the far windows giving on the whole valley going bruised dark under the dry lightning. And there, uncovered at the end, was a portrait someone had not the heart to sheet. A fair young man, handsome as sin, laughing out of the frame, and beside it, smaller, a plain, dark boy of 10 or so, standing a careful half-step behind his brother's shoulder, already the one who watched. Grace stood in front of it a long time, while the lightning came and went without rain. She let herself see it whole, there in the dark, because she had been putting it in a drawer for weeks, and the drawer would not stay shut any longer. She loved him. There was no sense pretending to herself that she did not, alone in a gallery in a dry storm. She was too honest a bookkeeper to keep a false figure in her own private ledger. She loved the great rough kindness of him, and the quick mind he hid, and the pestle, and the lamp at the height of her hand, and the way he had held that ridiculous pig. And it was the lamp and the pestle that told her, plainly, why it could not be. Because that was what he did. That was the whole of the man Bet had shown her, and he had shown himself. He loved a broken thing by mending it in secret, and never saying so. He had mended her shelf as he had meant to mend his brother's roof, out of the same deep, helpless need to set right what was wounded. And she was, to him, another leaking gutter, another sorry sow, another ruined room in a house full of them. And he was kind to her because kindness was the only language his grief had left him. And she must not, she absolutely must not mistake a duke's charity to a broken servant for the other thing, because that mistake was made every day by women plainer of sense than she, and it ended them. He would mend her, and when she was mended, he would marry some fair, laughing girl who matched the portrait, some Diana, and Grace would make the wedding cordials with a steady hand and write the date in her book. That was the shape of it. She stood with the truth of it cool and complete in her, the way she stood with a fever she could not break, and she did not weep, or not for long, and she did not resolve anything, because there was nothing to resolve. She named it to herself, plainly, in the dark, the way she named a thing in her book, so as not to have to guess at it in the future. I love him, and he is being kind, and those are two different facts, and I will not confuse them. Then she went back down to the still room, because the storm had not broken, and there was elderflower still to strain, and a woman who cannot have a thing had better have her work. The thing that broke instead of the weather was the mill weir at 2 a.m, 3 nights later, in the rain that finally came. It came down in sheets after the long dry, more than the runnels could carry, and the old weir above the home farm that kept the leat from the low meadows had a rotten hatch nobody had mended in Vane's careful economies, and the hatch gave, and the water came through the gap in a growing roar, and if the breach widened before dawn, it would take the footbridge and flood the low barns where the whole of the early harvest was stored against a wet August, 6 weeks of the estate's bread. The alarm came up to the house by a soaked boy on a pony, and the Duke was out and down there in his shirt before Grace had her boots laced, and Grace went after him, because a night of men in cold water is a night that wants someone who knows what cold water does to a body. What followed was 4 hours she would never be able to write in any book. There was no gentry, and no service down at that weir in the black and the rain. There was only the dozen bodies that could be got there, and the water, and the Duke of Aldermere in it to his waist, directing the packing of the breach with hurdles and stone and stakes, and any filled sack that could be dragged, and Grace on the bank with a lantern, and her chest, and a great can of something hot laced with ginger and spirit, that she poured into every man who came out shaking, sending them back changed. She saw who was near, foundering before they knew it themselves, by the colour of their lips in the lantern light, and the slur in their speech. And she pulled 2 men out by main authority, who would have worked themselves into the river, and she bound a hand laid open on a stake without stopping the work of the hand's owner, wrapping it as he heaved, and all the while the rain came, and the roar of the breach fought against the growing wall of hurdle and stone, and slowly, an hour before light, lost, and once, in the worst of it, packing sacks side by side in the shallows, because there were not enough hands to spare her, she and the Duke had their shoulders against the same stubborn hurdle in the black water, pushing it home against the shove of the leat, their hands a knuckle apart on the wet wood, and their breath ragged in the same rhythm. And he turned his streaming face to her in the lantern light, and she to him, and neither said one word, because there was nothing that could be said in a river at 3 in the morning that would not be either too little or far too much. And then the hurdle went home and held, and the moment went with it, downstream, unspoken, and was theirs. By grey light the breach was packed, and the leat was falling, and the low barns were dry, and the men stood about on the bank, shaking and grinning the way men do who have beaten a thing together. And the Duke of Aldermere looked at his still-room girl, soaked to the skin, her hair down, her lantern guttering, her hands raw, going along the line of exhausted men with the last of the hot can. And he did not say anything, but Bet Cordwainer, had she been there, and had she her eyes, could have told him what his face was saying, and it was not the face of a man mending a gutter. The reckoning came at Michaelmas, in the steward's audit, in front of the whole gathered household, and 2 neighbouring gentlemen Vane had invited to lend the occasion weight. And Vane meant it to break her. He had seen which way the house had turned. He had seen the Duke come alive by inches, and the savings mount, and the girl at the centre of it keeping her book. And he understood that his 11 quiet years were numbered unless he could make her the thief before she made him one. So he stood up at the long table in the great hall with the accounts before him, and the household ranged along the walls, and he was very grave and very sorrowful, and he said that it pained him beyond expression, but that since the new still-room woman had taken it upon herself to meddle in the household purchasing, the still-room's own stores had shown a grievous and mounting shortfall. Sugar, spirits of wine, and above all a quantity of French brandy laid down for the house, and that he had the figures here, and that he greatly feared, they pointed only one way, to the young person from Wexcombe, of whom, he was sorry to say, nothing certain was known, whose own family had put her off, and who had come to them under a cloud she had never explained. It was well done. 2 of the maids gasped. The strange gentleman looked grave. The Duke, at the head of the table, went very still, and said nothing at all, and did not look at Grace, and she felt the old cold looking away close over her like water, and understood that he had gone silent, and did not know in that moment whether the silence was doubt. Grace stood out from the wall. She did not raise her voice. She had her father's chest under her arm and her book in her hand, and she set the book on the table where the accounts lay. "You will have a date for each loss, Mr. Vane," she said. "May I hear the dates?" Vane had not expected to be asked for dates. He said, smoothly, that the shortfall was a running one, accumulated across the quarter, that it was in the nature of such peculation to be gradual. "Then take the largest," said Grace. "The brandy. You say a quantity of French brandy is gone from the cellar since I came, and that I took it. Name the day it was checked full, and the day it was found short. You keep the cellar book. You have the dates." He gave 2 dates, because 2 strange gentlemen were watching, and he could not refuse to. A day in July and a day in September. And he gave them a shade too readily. And Grace opened her own book to the July date, and turned it round on the table, so the nearest gentleman could read the small squared hand, the column that squared, on that day in July, she said, and every day either side of it. I was here, in this hall, or in the still room, or the dairy, and my book will show you the work of each hour, because I keep the hour. But that is not the proof, for a book can be written too. This is the proof." She lifted her father's brass balance from the chest and set it on the table with a small, definite sound, and beside it a single squat bottle she had carried in under her shawl. "Anyone in this house may go to the cellar now and fetch up one of the brandy bottles Mr. Vane says are so depleted, and we will weigh it, here, against this one, which is full, which I bought with the still room's own money and entered on its own page. A bottle of spirit has a weight, gentlemen, to the grain, glass, and spirit together, and it is the same weight in every bottle of a kind, and a full one will balance to nothing, and a broached one will not. If the cellar is being robbed of brandy, the bottles left will be light, or there will be fewer of them, and either way, the cellar book will not weigh true against the cellar. I have weighed it, Mr. Vane, 3 nights ago, with Mrs. Penhallow holding the light. The cellar holds every drop your own book says it holds. Nothing is gone from it at all." The hall was very quiet, which means, said Grace, and now for the first time she looked at Vane, and not at his figures, that the shortfall is not in the cellar. It is only in the book. Someone has written brandy out of the ledger that is still on the shelf, so that money for brandy might be drawn that was never spent, and the drawing laid, when a scale should ever be brought near it, upon whoever was newest and least believed. I did not take your brandy, Mr. Vane. Nobody took it. It is downstairs. It was never anything but ink. Here is the true part she owed, and she paid it before she finished, because a false charge that touches a true thing must be met with the true thing, or it festers. You said I came under a cloud I never explained, she said to the room plainly. That is fair, and I will explain it now, for I should have long ago. My father was a physician who died in debt, and the debt was real, and some of it was owed to people who could ill afford the loss, small people, a widow who had lent him £40. I knew that last winter that his accounts were wrong and his purse near empty, and I said nothing to those who trusted him, because to speak was to shame him while he lived, and I chose his good name over their warning. And after he died, the widow lost her £40, and I have never been able to make it good. That is my cloud. It is not brandy. It is that I once kept a kind silence that cost an honest woman her savings, and I keep my book so honestly now because of it, so that no one shall ever again lose money on my account for want of my speaking. There. Now you have it all, and it is worse than he said, and it is still not brandy. Nobody had talked her out of it, and nobody could give it back to her. The widow's £40 were gone and stayed gone, and she named them in front of two strange gentlemen, and did not soften it, and the hall was silent in a wholly different way. Then Alice Trewin spoke up from the wall, her sharp face white, because she was Bet Cordwainer's granddaughter, and had been raised not to lie in a great hall whatever it cost her. "The night of the low fever," she said, her voice shaking. "In July, that Mr. Vane once. She was at my sister's cottage the whole of it, by Suki's bed, writing in that book by the hour. I saw her there at 3. She could not have been near any cellar, and I'll say it though it costs me my place, for he's my master's steward, and I'm nobody. But she stayed with my sister's child when she'd no cause to, and I'll not stand here and hear her called a thief for it." And having said it, she looked as frightened as if she had jumped off the weir, because a housemaid who calls the steward a liar before Gentry has done a thing that does not come back. And Vane's careful voice, when he reached for it, was not there. He looked at the balance on the table, and the full bottle, and the squared book, and the two gentlemen already drawing back from him, and the housemaid who had said it out loud, and 11 years of rounded figures came apart in him where he stood. He appealed to his long service. He had given this house 11 years, he began. He had served the family faithfully since before this person was heard of, and heard how it sounded in the silence, how it landed on nothing, and understood, as Grace had understood in the drawing-room at Wexcombe, that the room had already decided. He did not rage. He went grey and quiet, and sat down without being told to. A plausible man, with the plausibility gone out of him. An old cheat suddenly only old. Grace could have finished him. The gentlemen were there. The word fraud was in every mouth. A sentence from her about the grocer and the cheese and the 11 years would have sent him from the house to the assizes, and the room would have let her say it. And part of her, the part that had been called no one in 100 drawing-rooms, wanted to. She looked at him a moment, the grey man in the good black cloth, and she found the wanting. And she put it down, because to pick it up would cost her something she had decided long ago not to spend. "You are old, Mr. Vane," she said quietly, so that only the near part of the room quite heard. "And you have a sister at Taunton, they tell me, that you keep. Go to her. Go tonight, and be gone by morning, and I will not weigh the rest of your books aloud in this hall, though they will not weigh true, and we both know it. Go and be some use to her, and do not come back, and that is the whole of what I have to say to you." And she closed her book, and there was nothing after it. She left the hall while they were still gathering the accounts, and she did not go up to the still room, because she could not be found by anyone there yet, least of all by him. She went instead to the little bare room over the dairy that was her own, and she sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the cold with her hands folded, and Bet Cordwainer came in slow and blind, and sat beside her, having felt her way up by the wall. "You've done it now," Bet said. "You've been proved. There's not a soul in this house by morning won't know you for what you are." She reached and found Grace's cold hands, and held them in her old warm ones. "Why are you sitting in the dark, like a woman who's lost, then, and not down there letting them make much of you?" "Because it changes nothing that matters," said Grace. And to the old blind woman, At the end of that long day, she found she could say the whole of it plainly, the way she had named it to herself in the gallery. I have proved I am honest. I have not proved I am anything he could want, and a man who mends broken things does not marry them, Bet. He mends them and sets them on the shelf and goes on to the next. He will thank me. He will raise my wages. He will be kind, and the kindness will be the worst of it, because I shall have to take it and make his cordials with a steady hand, and write the dates, and watch him marry some fair, laughing girl out of that gallery, who never wanted his house whole, because it was never broken for her. I am the mended thing. That is my place, and I have known it 3 years in one house or another, and I had rather leave in the morning than stand still to be thanked. So I am going to go. There is a woman near Wells, wants a still room kept, honest work, and I shall write in the morning and be gone by the week. And that is the sense of it, Bet. And you told me sense would not reach him, but sense is all I have. You great fool, said Bet Cordwainer, without heat, holding her hands. You clever, careful, counting fool. You've weighed every bottle in this house to the grain, and got the one sum in it wrong. But she did not say which sum, because it was not hers to say, and she stayed a while in the dark. And then she went, and Grace began, with dry eyes and a steady hand, to fold her few things into her father's chest. She was still folding them an hour later when the knock came, and it was not him. It was the kitchen boy, to say his Grace asked would she come down to the still room. There was a matter of the household physic he wished settled before the morning, and Grace, who had resolved everything and undone nothing, smoothed her grey gown and went down, because a servant answers a bell, and because some cowardly, hoping thing in her would not, even now, quite stay in its drawer. He was standing by the scoured table when she came in the lamplight, at the shelf he had lowered to the height of her hand, and he had the household physic book open in front of him, as if for a reason, and he shut it when she came in. And for a moment the great articulate silence of the man was on him, and he could not begin at all. There is no matter of the physic, he said at last. I said that because I did not know how else to make you come, and I have been standing here the quarter hour finding I do not know how to make you stay, which is a harder thing, and I am very bad at it, as you know. He put his hand flat on the shut book. I stood in that hall today and let him call you a thief, and said nothing, for the length of a breath, because I am a coward who has not spoken a true thing aloud in 3 years, and in that breath a part of me was afraid it might be true, and you saw me be silent, and I will carry the shame of that one breath a long time. That is the first thing I have to say, and it is the worst, and I have said it. I doubted you for a breath, and you did not deserve it. Robert, said Grace, his name the first time, and it stopped him. You do not have to. I do, he said. Let me be bad at it to the end. I wrote to my brother 3 weeks since, after you told me to say only that the roof leaked. I said the roof leaks, and I cannot mend it without him, and I do not want it whole while he is in a hired room at Bristol. He has written back. He is coming at the quarter to shout at me, he says, which is the kindest thing he has said to me in years. His voice went, and he mastered it. You did that, not by mending it, by telling me the one plain thing to say. You have never once tried to mend me. Do you know that? Everyone in my life has tried to manage my grief, and you only ever handed me the true sentence and let me be. And I stood here tonight, understanding that I do not want you at the height of my hand. I want— He stopped and started again, worse. I am asking you not to go to Wells, Bet told me. I am asking you to stay, and not as the still room keeps you, as I— And there the fluent world failed the Duke of Aldermere entirely, and he came round the table and got down, on the cold stone floor of a still room, in front of a plain woman in a turned grey gown, which was the most inconvenient floor in the house, and he did not finish the sentence in words at all, but looked up at her and held out his burned hand, the one she had bound the first night, palm up, offering the scar. And Grace Marsh, who had proved that nothing was ever gone that the book still held, looked down at the great fool of a man on the cold floor, and found that the one sum she had got wrong was coming right in front of her, and could not speak for a moment either. You count everything, he said from the floor. Count this. I have said one true thing tonight, in the hall, and I could not, and then 2 more here, and I could not, and everyone was about you. That is 3 true things from a man who had none in him this time last year. Weigh that against a duke who mends gutters, and tell me which is the truer figure. That is not fair, said Grace unsteadily, using my own trade against me. And she put her raw hand into his burned one and closed it, and did not let go. And that was her answer, and he got up off the floor with it held fast, and did not say anything else, being at last, mercifully, out of words. They were married from the mended house in October, quietly, with the harvest safe in the dry barns, and the shutters open along the front for the first time in 3 years. Edmund came for it, fair and thinner than his portrait, and quick to laugh still, and shouted at his brother in the hall as promised, and then wept in his arms in the same hall where the cruel thing had been said. And the 2 of them began, roughly, the slow work that brothers do. Mrs. Penhallow ran the wedding breakfast off a scale kept honestly by the door, and wept into the syllabub. Alice Trewin, who had a place for life now and knew it, dressed the bride, and told her sharply to hold still. Vane was gone to Taunton and his sister, diminished, unpardoned, quietly let be, and lived, they heard, well enough, and did no more harm. And Bet Cordwainer, who had said sense would never reach the man, and had been right, sat in the best chair by the fire, with her blind eyes turned toward the warmth and the noise. And when the new Duchess of Aldermere came, and knelt by her chair to be found by her old warm hands, Bet held the plain, clever face between them, and said, "Only, there. You weighed it right in the end," and would say no more, being a woman who knew the value of a thing left unfinished. The last of the Holland covers came off the long gallery that winter, and the fair young man in the portrait had his laughing brother back beneath it, in the flesh, at last. But the picture the new Duchess stopped before, on the evening it was uncovered, was the small one beside it, of the plain dark boy of 10 standing the careful half-step behind, already the one who watched and mended and did not speak. And she stood in front of it a long while with her husband's mended hand in hers, and did not tell him what she saw there, because some sums you carry without saying them aloud. He had asked her name before she left the room, that first grey morning, when the whole world had agreed she was no one. And she had given it to him plainly, expecting nothing, as she gave everyone the plain fact of things. And that, in the end, was the whole of it, and the whole of her, that she never once tried to be more than she was, and was found, by the one man patient enough to ask, to be everything. So here is what I will leave you to carry off into your own evening, wherever you are, with your own door shut against your own dark. When the whole room has looked away and agreed on what you are worth, who is it that stops and turns back and asks your name? And have you, perhaps, already weighed yourself too light and got the one sum wrong that matters most? Come back and sit with me again, and we will weigh another one together.